Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Just like your favorite neighborhood bookshop, this show is a place to explore, find hidden gems, and meet new writers from every corner of the publishing world. Feel free to browse around and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm your host, Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and your guide to great conversations with some amazing writers. This is episode number 273. If you enjoy the show, please take a moment to leave a review, follow along on social media, and share the podcast with fellow readers. Before we dive in today, a quick update from my own writing desk. The first 3 books in my new series, The Old City Mysteries, are out in the world and available wherever you like to buy books. Details about all my books, links to my social media, my newsletter sign-up, and the latest podcast episodes can be found on my website, staceyhoran.com. Thanks for supporting both the show and my stories. On today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm joined by author Brad Barkley to talk about his new young adult novel, The Real Life of Zara Kegg. In this heartfelt story, 16-year-old Zara moves with her dad to a small town, still reeling from the loss of her mother. Life feels stalled until Zara takes a job as a projectionist in a rundown movie house, a quiet refuge where she finds unexpected comfort in the glow of old films. There she meets Zachary, a boy with odd clothes, odd stories, and a charm that masks his own struggles. What unfolds is a love story threaded with both comedy and tragedy, much like the movies playing on Zara's screen. In this episode, I'll chat with Brad about his writing journey, the importance of honest young adult stories, and how his love for Super 8 films shaped this novel, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Brad Barkley, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I thought what we could do is talk about your brand new book, The Real Life of Zara Kegg. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
This is a young adult novel about 16-year-old Zara, who has had a little bit of a rough go lately. Her mother has died 3 years prior to the opening of the book, and right before that, her father had moved them out of Atlanta and back to his childhood home of Carolina Beach, North Carolina. So she's in a new place, which is isolating enough, but she's still feeling a lot of grief over her mom. Her dad is expressing his grief, apparently trying to blow up his career as a sports writer. And she's taken a job as a projectionist at this rundown place, the Palace Theater, which shows only old, cheesy, black and white sci-fi and horror movies from the 50s and 60s. So she kind of runs the show there. Mostly she's in the projection booth. It's a very lonely existence for her until she meets this boy named Zachary. And, she's struck immediately that they both have Z names. What are the odds? And they kind of connect immediately. She calls him in her head before she knows his name, Mr. Inconsistent, because of his wardrobe, first of all. But then she starts to notice that some of his story is a little inconsistent as well. So, while she's kind of connecting with him, there are lots of questions. And so it's a love story. It has this backdrop of her tragedy in her life, but also comedy. I think the two go hand in hand almost always. And, the climax of the book comes when her boss at the theater decides that for Valentine's Day they're going to have a Godzilla marathon. So she has to do all the work for the Godzilla marathon.
Because that's what everybody thinks of when they think of Valentine's Day is Godzilla.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And a couple other characters in the book say, what does Godzilla have to do with Valentine's Day? And her answer is, it's hard to explain. Right.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Zara. So, well, let's wind it back actually just a little bit. I'm curious what the spark was for this story. What was the that one thing that you thought, okay, this is what I build this story around?
I it's interesting. I've always loved those movies. I grew up with those kinds of movies, and this is going to sound sad and weird for myself, but when I was a kid, I found out you could check out. This is going to age me a little bit, but Super 8 movies from the library, and a lot of them were, Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney, The Wolf Man, so on. And my dad brought home a Super 8 projector from his work. And so I would sit in the basement and watch those movies by myself while the rest of my more normal family was upstairs watching regular TV. And then from there, we had a local TV station that played shock theater on Saturday nights with this host guy dressed up and called himself Dr. Paul Bearer, right? Paul Bearer, kind of great pun there. So I just still love those movies, and I always knew I would write about them someday. I didn't think it would be in this context, but usually what for me the spark of any novel or short story is sort of this just seeing a character in a situation. So I saw Zara. I didn't have her name then, but I saw this young woman isolated in this projection booth of this movie theater. And it was just felt like an organic, here's my chance. If I'm going to ever write about these movies that I love, here's your chance, right? So those two just kind of came together, and that was the initial spark for the book.
Mm, interesting. So the movies that you mention in the book, these are ones that you've seen. I assume these are
I've
favorites of
I
yours,
have seen them, yeah. Well, some of them are favorites because they're actually good. These book movies were all made on like micro budgets, and
right?
they usually film them in like 10 days. I mean, the most famous one is Ed Wood Jr. In fact, they made a movie about him, and Plan 9 from Outer Space is supposed to be the worst movie ever made, and so on. Um, but occasionally one of them is really good. So, the book opens with a movie called, on the very first page, she's showing a movie called Carnival of Souls, which is actually really good and really creepy and again, the guy made it on a budget of $30,000 and filmed it in 15 days. But yeah, the most of them are pretty bad movies, but I still love them. I'm charmed by them, that somebody went to this kind of trouble, on a shoestring. A lot of times the actors were like the director's dentist, you know. Ed Wood famously was making a movie with Bela Lugosi, and Bela Lugosi died. So Ed Wood just got his chiropractor to play the role for the rest of the movie, and he has to keep his face covered with his cape the whole time, so that you can't see it's not Bela Lugosi. So yeah, they're a mixed bag. Most of them are pretty bad, but I still love them.
So let's talk a little bit about Zara. You said the spark was picturing her in the projection booth. So I'm curious how she evolved from that first image to the Zara we have on the page. Did you know then a lot of the things that would go into making her fully formed? Or did that sort of happen later as you were fleshing out the story? You understood what she needed to be for you.
Yeah, I knew she was in the projection booth. I knew that I was going to have her showing these movies, so I would have the chance to write about them. And every character has to have a problem, right? Or else there's no real story there. There's no conflict. So I wanted it to be about her grief. You know, partly, during the writing of this, I was dealing with the death of both of my own parents, but I didn't want it to be that sort of immediate aftermath of grief where any odd behavior or any whatever is, or depression or whatever that is fully understandable. I mean, it's been 3 years, and I don't think grief ever goes away entirely, but I I think at the 3 year mark, you ought to feel like your life is starting to get back on track, and hers is not, and her father's is not either. So um, that's sort of where the novel starts. You know, it's coming to a head of like, are they ever going to get out of this grief?
Well, and let's talk a bit about Zachary because he, in a certain way, sort of answers that question. When will she ever? What will help pull her out? So let's talk a little bit about Zachary, and in particular, I'm curious how you created him as a character. What was important to you that he have or represent, or what function he perform in the story?
When they first meet, she's got this first thing she talks about in the novel is she has this what they call a courtesy window in the projection booth, and traditionally the courtesy window, there's three windows up there, two for the projectors and one for the projectionist. And they even traditionally have a little tiny curtain on them with a little tiny pull string. And so she looks out her curtain and she knows who all her regulars are in the crowd. And she's already puzzled by him because, she says he's there for every showing of every movie. And she doesn't imagine why anybody not getting paid to be there would want to do that. And eventually he makes his way to the projection booth to complain about the movie is wobbly, it's a bad print, and so on. And it was just that was all I had in mind at first, that and his odd wardrobe. And she realizes, this is the first person who's talked to me in 3 years. I mean, she's in a brand new high school. She doesn't know anybody. She didn't grow up there. So despite his kind of odd behavior, she doesn't want him to leave and ends up talking him into a tour of the rest of the palace. And so it's that, it starts with that. And then to my mind, after you introduce something in a novel, everything else that happens after that is organic. So, why is he dressed so strangely? Well, the answer is somewhere within his character and within his situation. So all I have to do is look for that, right? So I think a lot of times writers sort of cast around outside the book for elements to include, but my philosophy is it's already there. You just haven't found it yet. Right? Just start turning over the rocks you've already put into place. Um, so eventually we, find out his life is not in a great place either. He lives with his grandfather in this trailer at the fairgrounds, which is shut down for the winter. In fact, pretty much the whole town is shut down for the winter, and his grandfather's quite a drinker, and he doesn't go to school. He tells her he's self-taught, and so gradually she starts finding out, as we do, what his situation is, and her finding out is really me finding out. So like as I'm writing, I'm discovering more and more about him, about her, and about how this interaction starts to matter to both of them.
Interesting. So this was not a book that you had plotted every detail in advance. It sounds like a lot of this was sort of organic in the writing. In the writing.
That's the way I always approach it,
Hmm.
whether it's a novel or a short story. the only thing I've ever outlined or planned would be like an academic paper in graduate school or something like that. But when it comes to fiction, I never outline, I never plan, um, for a couple reasons. To me, it's, as I just suggested, it's a process of discovery. And I know if those discoveries are surprising to me, they'll be surprising to the reader as well. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is, I think, and I tell my students this too, when you write, your main job as a writer is to get out of the way. You're trying to get to this place in your subconscious where the same part of your brain that dreams come from. And what I tell students is this: if I had to sit on the edge of my bed every night before I went to sleep and think up and plot out and plan what my dream was going to be that night, it'd be all right, but it would never be as interesting or weird or surprising or strange as what my subconscious brain comes up with. So I think the same holds for writing. If I have to sort of look at the ceiling and, oh, what comes next, it's never going to be as interesting as what just sort of comes in filtered through imagination. That can be frustrating at times. I'll get stuck. I'll get myself sort of painted into corners. But by this point, I've learned to trust the process that if my subconscious mind has handed me the story, it's going to be able to solve all the problems with it as well.
Mm. Do you ever know the ending when you start, or is that
I do.
also you do? Okay, so you know.
Sometimes, well, I don't know it when I start,
Okay.
but this is going to sound weird and kind of woo-woo magic. But at some point with every book I've written so far, and there's nothing special that triggers it, but maybe I'm halfway in, maybe I'm three-quarters of the way in. I just get an image of what the final scene is going to be. And it's very specifically like they're going to be sitting at this place doing this. And I don't know how to get there, but that gives me a target. So
Mm.
at that point, at that halfway point, at that three-quarters point, I have something that I'm aiming at. I just don't know how to get there yet.
Yeah. Have you ever had that experience in your writing where you have put a scene down on paper or you're working through something and the characters do something, something is said, the idea comes to you and you think, okay, I didn't see that coming, would never in a million years have guessed that. It feels like it's given to you or it comes to you from somewhere else.
For sure. And again, this sounds kind of mysterious, but I know I've had a good day of writing when I look back at it the next day or later that night, and I don't quite remember writing that. Right. So
Yeah.
it's like I know that I was in that sort of flow state, that I was writing out of that subconscious part of my brain. I wasn't sitting there kind of racking my brain to think it up. I was just getting out of the way and letting the story come. So that happens. And then the other thing that happens that I think is genuinely mysterious is when I've run into problems where I'm stuck. I What I've learned is that if I just pay attention when I'm out in the world, I will see something or overhear something that solves the problem for me. Like, what are the chances that, two people I overhear in a restaurant are going to say the line that's going to be the next line in my book that's going to get me unstuck? Well, I know my brain is making those connections, but it feels weird. Like, you want to go thank that person. Like, how did you know? Right? How did you know I needed that
Right,
line?
right, right.
So,
Yeah.
um,
It's the magic in the
it's the
process, isn't
magic.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My job as a teacher is to teach them technique. And there is a lot of technique in fiction writing, of course, as you know. But I always tell them there's an X factor there that can't be taught. You just have to discover it. You just have to experience it. And it's going to feel weird when it happens, but it happens.
Yeah. No, it's very true. And when it does, it's very exciting. It is very
Yeah.
exciting. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about making choices when you write a story. And it sounds to me that some of these are, they just sort of come to you, right? Your subconscious brain is making these choices for you. So I'm curious at what stage you decide to do something, and whether more often or not it's a surprise to you, or you mean to do something, you intend to do it. So for example, the specific movies you chose to use in this book, did you know ahead of time? Were those choices you made, or was it sort of in the moment as you're typing you think, oh, this is going to be perfect for this scene?
It was a mix of
Mm.
both, but some I just included because they're ones I like. Some I just included because they have great titles. Panther Girl of the Congo is a great title. And Zara says it's the worst movie you'll ever watch. Um, but then some of them, I kind of discussed, and this whole thing was a surprise to me that I knew I was going to have the Palace Theater kind of run down, a little dilapidated. I knew I was going to have these old movies, but the way that the movie started functioning within the whole of Zara's story was a genuine surprise for me. For example, and this is probably my favorite scene in the book, even though it's a real quiet one. There's a scene where it's a Wednesday night and it's raining and no one shows up for the movie. She doesn't sell one ticket. And her boss insists that the show must go on. So she has to show the movie to an empty house. So instead of sitting in the projection booth, she feels like it makes her feel bad that she's showing this movie and no one's watching it. She says people went to all the trouble to make it, even if it was 60 years ago. Somebody should be watching this movie. So she takes her popcorn and coffee, which is her usual movie snack, and heads down and sits in the theater to watch the movie. And the one I picked just because it's one I've seen and one I like the title was it's called The Hideous Sun Demon. And it's about this scientist who's been blasted with radiation, of course, and it turns him into this monster that appears whenever sunlight hits him. So he decides that in order to live his life, he's just going to have to stay in the dark, never be out in the daylight and avoid people. So she's watching this movie, and here's Zara alone, sitting in the dark, avoiding people.
Right.
And it's like, well, that works out. And then, of course, what his tragic end is that he falls in love. He falls in love. He and his new love interest make love on the beach, fall asleep, and then he wakes up, the sun's up, he turns into the hideous sun demon, and the police end up shooting him. So that fits, I don't want to draw too much of a spotlight on those connections because it feels a little forced, but Zara doesn't articulate all that. But by the end of this ridiculous movie, she's in the theater sobbing. And the only connection she makes is, she says, I just feel sorry for the guy. All he wanted was to be left alone. All he wanted was to be in the dark. And there's just so many resonances there, so many echoes of her story. And that was just an accident. I mean, I know again it wasn't, but I didn't see all that until after it was written.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, what about the setting? So small beach town, but not during sort of the high season. You chose the off season. So I
Right.
mean, for anybody who's been to a small beach town during the off season, it's can be a ghost town. I mean, there
Right.
really isn't a lot happening.
Yeah.
And if you're a teenager growing up in that environment, it can be painful. Like there is really not much going on. But why that setting. I mean, small town, big versus big town, off season versus the height of the season. I'm curious if that was a conscious choice up front, or again, like it just sort of came organically as you were writing.
It was a combination. You know, it I mean I love the beach any time of the year, but I do like the beach in the winter. I like that feeling, we go to Ocean City, Maryland usually if we're headed to the beach and there's a very long boardwalk there and just that sort of deserted boardwalk with the waves crashing. It's romantic in its own way. All right. So there was that, just the desire to write about that vibe. But at the same time, I think, two teenagers having a summer romance at the beach is such a trope. I mean, it's so familiar that I felt like, okay, you got to just completely flip that on its head,
Right.
uh, or it's not going to work. So that part of it was consciously decided. I can't have summer romance at the beach. It's not that kind of book.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so, so yeah.
How about the choice to make her 16? It's a story that probably would have worked for a slightly older adult. It could have been an adult story, but why choose young adult characters and gear it towards a young adult audience? What was it that drew you to that?
I was sort of mid-career when I first wrote a young adult book. And well, I'll put it this way. My first novel was sold as an adult book, marketed as an adult book. It's called Money Love, but the protagonist of that book is 16, right? So I think I've sort of naturally had that inclination. And then I think I think it's important for young adults to have good books to read. And a lot of, what I always tell people is a lot of times a grown up will hand a book to another grown up and say, wow, you should read this. It changed my life. Well, they don't really mean that it changed. Your life is pretty settled by the time you're 40. All right. So what they mean is it's really good and it blew me away. And I think you'll like it too. But, it changed my life is actually literally true for young adults and books. I know it was true for me. You know, a separate piece changed my life. So I think in that way, they're almost more important to have those good books exist for that audience than for any other audience, right? And not a knock on these kind of books, but there's so much out there that's dystopia and vampires and you know kind of bleak that I think young adult audiences need books that offer a little bit of hope, not in like a Pollyanna way, but in a realistic way. All right, this is somebody coming out of grief, and a young man is coming out of fairly poverty-stricken situation, and also some struggles with mental illness, and so. It's not to just sort of slap a smiley face sticker on top of the story, but to offer hope in the midst of real troubles. I think it's important for that audience. And like I said, the books that stay with me are the ones that I read when I was 14, 15, 16.
So when you were the age of the readers of this book, of your readers, is this a story you would have pulled from the shelf? And if you had, how do you think you would have reacted to it?
I think I would have loved the movies. Right? I was already into the movies, so that's probably would have made me open it in the first place. I think the publishing world likes to sort of slot books, especially for young adults, into this is a girl's book or this is a boy's book, which I think is silly. I mean, every book is going to have, all kinds of people in it. So, yeah, I think I would have liked this book. It's funny, I like books that are funny, and so there would have been a lot to draw me there. Yeah.
What is next for you? Are there more young adult books planned? Is your hope to keep writing for this for this audience? And do you have a list of the stories you are are writing, or is it really just the biggest, brightest, shiniest idea gets your attention next?
Yeah, I finished another novel since I finished Zara, and it's with my agent. It's for grown-ups, and it's very hard to elevator pitch that book. So we're having a little trouble getting it to land somewhere, but I think it'll end up with a good home eventually. I don't have any ideas for young adult novels, but I'm sure I'm going to return to that at some point. I do have an idea for a sequel to Zara. I've never written a sequel in my life, so I'd kind of like to try it. And I have a few rough ideas for that, but we'll see how this one does. Right. And maybe write that one. But yeah, I want to, give as much attention to the release of this book as I can. And then once all that dust settles, I'll be back to writing full blast and we'll see what comes next.
Do you have other goals as a writer? I mean, is there anything out there that you haven't done yet that you would like to do, whether it's on the near horizon or off in the distance?
There are other things that are goals, but I've decided by this point they're probably unachievable because I like that sounds like I've given up on myself, but I haven't. I like when writers can do things that I can't do. If I could write a tightly plotted murder mystery, I would love to do that, like full of red herrings and suspects who you're not sure if they're real, but it's just that key word there for me is plotting.
Mm,
Um, as I said, for me, it's just a process of discovery, and I don't think you can just discover your way through a murder mystery. I think it has to be pretty tightly planned out before you type the first word. So yeah, I would love to be able to do that, but I don't think I ever will.
mhm.
But maybe something more genre-ish, good ghost story, something like that. Uh, I'd be interested. No ideas for doing that right now, but we'll see.
Right, right. Well, you never know.
You
S-
never know. Yeah. I had when I started my it's been a surprise at every turn. When I started writing, I thought that I was going to be a short story writer. And I am. I mean, I've published two collections of short stories, but all my heroes were mostly short story writers. Flannery O'Connor, Eudora Welty, even Hemingway, I would put in that camp. I think he's going to be remembered over time, mostly for those short stories, more than his novels, and Raymond Carver, so on. And I thought that's the purest form of writing. That's the perfect cut diamond of literature, and it is in a lot of ways. But when I wrote my first novel at some encouragement of a teacher, I was like, I love this. I love just the elbow room you have in there, and that it's a little sloppy and it can be a little messy, and it feels more like real life to me. So um, since I wrote that first one, I just haven't looked back. I just love the form.
Yeah. So it sounds like each project is full of surprises. The your career in total full of surprises. So I would say don't rule out that murder mystery just yet,
Right,
because
right.
that may be a surprise yet to come.
Right. Yeah. Maybe I'll wake up someday and the whole thing will be in my head. It could
It
happen.
could happen. Well,
Yeah.
in the meantime, while we wait to see if that comes to pass, where should people go if they want to learn more about you and the books, look for new releases, that sort of thing?
I maintain a pretty active website, bradbarkley.com, so it's easy to find. And from there, you'll find, links to my old books, the new books, my publisher, places to buy the new book, and so on. So that's probably the best place to start. I'm fairly active on social media, but again, if you just go to bradbarkley.com, all my socials are there as well.
As well as links to purchase the
Right,
books. Okay.
right. All
Wonderful.
right.
Wonderful. Well, Brad, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the
Well,
podcast.
thank
And I
you.
want to wish you luck with the real life of Zara Kegg. Congratulations on it and on everything you've accomplished so far. Best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
All right. Well, thank you for a great conversation and thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is all about helping readers discover new voices. This show brings you into conversation with authors from every corner of the writing world, and each of them has a story worth hearing. I'm your host, Stacey Horan, author of the Old City Mystery series and several standalone novels. Sharing conversations with fellow writers is one of my favorite parts of the creative life, and I'm thrilled to bring those conversations to you. Keep listening, keep exploring, and keep finding the stories that speak to you. There's always another treasure waiting here in the bookshop at the end of the internet.